Hi. Recently on hammock forums, there have been several threads that discuss creating a do-it-yourself gravity water filtration system using a dry bag as a major component. It's the water reservoir. You're using the waterproofness of the bag to hold water in, as opposed to the normal use of a dry bag, which is to keep water out. So I found all of those threads very useful, and so thanks to everyone who experimented this and with this and shared their results. I'm going to try it myself, which is what this video is about. And we start with the bag itself. This is a Sea to Summit dry bag. It's got an 8-liter capacity, which is probably more than I need. If there was a 6-liter, it would probably be better, but there's no such thing, so we're going to use 8 liters. I found this in my gearbox. I don't know why it was there. I don't use dry bags. I don't know how long it's been there, but a couple of years at least. In checking against the Sea to Summit website, I see that the weight of this bag would correspond to the 8-liter bag in the Ultra-Sil series, not the Ultra-Sil Nano series. It's 0.3 of an ounce, too heavy to be the Nano. So that's what we're starting with, I'm pretty sure. The construction of the bag here is that it's got one seam that runs down the length of one side, and another seam that goes around the bottom. And the upshot of that is that means there is no seam at the center of the bottom where we're going to put a hole, and that is a good thing. So that's the bag. We'll come back to this. So in addition to the bag, we need some other components, some hardware and such. Well, first off, we need a filter. This is a Sawyer Mini. Most of you are probably familiar with. There are other filters that will work in a gravity situation, but this one is very popular and it's not very expensive, and it's what we have. So that's the filter we're going to use. On the hardware, other hardware, we have some tubing. Again, my gearbox has a plentiful supply of 1/4-inch ID tubing that came from various platypus hydration systems. So this is platy hose, but any 1/4-inch ID hose can be made to work. I got a whole bunch of hardware from the U.S. Plastic Corporation. They have an extensive website. It can be a little intimidating to navigate your way around. We will be putting part numbers on the YouTube page for this, so I put them on the screen. We won't have to try to write them down while they're up. They'll be there to see. So as we talked, we're going to make a hole in the bag, and then you need a way to attach tubing to the hole, and this is most people's solution to that dilemma. So this is a barbed fitting that will go on 1/4-inch ID hose, and it's threaded at the other end. And the basic technique is you put an O-ring on there, and you pass it through the hole we're going to make in the bag, and then on the inside you put the second O-ring, and then you take something perhaps like this, which has a corresponding thread, and you tighten it down and make a watertight seal. It remains to be seen whether this will be watertight all by itself or whether it's going to need some silicone to help it out. I don't like this particular fitting in this place because it's sitting like this in the bottom of the bag, and the water's not going to go down below the top of that opening. So you're going to have over an inch of water that's not going to drain out. And that's kind of a waste. You carry it all the way back from the water source, and now it's going to do you no good at all. So I got another piece. It's actually a cap. It used to have a solid top, but I drilled it out, and again the threads match, and you put that on instead. Now you're only got maybe a little over half an inch of water that's going to stand in the bottom of the bag. So it's not night and day, but it's a minor improvement. So, but I didn't like this fitting all that much either, and the reason is it's a hard connection between to there and the hose, and I wanted to be able to detach the hose from the bag. So they do make naturally quick connects, also with the barb fittings for the 1/4 inch tubing, and those go together like that and come apart. As it happens, although these came from U.S. Plastics, they are compatible with and identical to the ones that Dutch sells on the Dutch Wear Gear website. Same manufacturer, whole deal. So that was nifty, but that still didn't solve my problem because water is going to just flow right through those. I can disconnect, but the bag won't hold water that way. So there's a variation on the theme here, and that is, this guy. He's threaded on one end and has the male quick connect on the other end, but not sure you're going to be able to see. There's a little bit of extra hardware involved there right at the tip. That's this little guy. And that'll go in and out. And the function there is that when it's extended, like it is now, water will not flow through this fitting. When this is depressed, then water will flow through. This is called a stop. Hydraulic fittings, if you're used to them using those, work the same way. They always are effectively a stop. You can get the same thing for garden hoses, but it turns out you can also get them for a 1/4 inch hose. So this is the same female member we were using before, but it has the added effect here of depressing that little collar. So now water will flow through, but now water will not. So when we connect this to the bag, these bits of hardware are all that has to go along with the bag down to the water source to get the dirty water. Tubing doesn't have to go, filter doesn't have to go, everything else stays behind in camp. It's not going to be in the way when you're trying to scoop water, that kind of, you don't have to worry about stuff getting contaminated because it's safe back at camp. So that's the way we're going to go with this. The only last thing that really haven't discussed is the O-rings, which are just off-the-shelf O-rings from my local hardware store. 1/2 inch interior diameter, which gives it a snug fit on these threads, which I assume is what you want. So that's pretty much it for hardware, and because of the stop feature of that component, we don't need one of these. Something to leave behind. So actually figuring out the hardware and getting it was the hard part of this project. The actual doing of the project is fairly trivial. You just have to make a hole in the bag and then assemble your pieces. Now, the first people who documented doing this talked about very carefully cutting a hole with some scissors and then using a lighter to melt the edges so the fabric wouldn't fray. And fortunately, somebody came up with a better way. Fallniven, I hope I'm pronouncing his hammock forum name correctly, documented a technique that is much simpler and less likely to get screwed up. And that is, you use a socket from your socket set, you heat it up, and then you melt a hole through the material, and that will simultaneously make the hole and melt the edge, so you won't get the fabric fraying problem. Just one fell swoop, two birds with one stone. It's brilliant. So that's what we're going to do. This particular socket is a 7mm socket. I don't know what it's a little less than ½ an inch in diameter, which you would think is too small, but in doing some testing, I found that actually the hole that gets made ends up being a little bit bigger than the diameter, the outside diameter of the socket. I'm not quite sure why, but testing showed that this will make the right size hole for us, so that's what we're going to use. We're going to heat this up using our alcohol stove. This is a Mini Bull design. I believe he called it the Simple Circle stove. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. We're going to get that going. And we're going to heat that for about 3 minutes. And I won't make you watch it all. Okay. So the other thing that we had to figure out is how to actually make the hole, here in the bottom, and you got all this other fabric, and you don't want to damage any of that. We'll get away from there. And the brilliant technique I came up with is I'm going to use this paint can, in case you're wondering what that was doing here. And I found that it does a little better job if I make the hole onto a piece of wood rather than the metal. So that's why I've got that little block of wood there. So we're just going to kind of thread that onto the can. And then, because it doesn't want to stay in place, I mean, we want that to be nice and flat and whatnot, so we'll use a rubber band to hold that. And now we have a good flat surface there to make the hole on. So we've got another 2 minutes to wait. On the heating. So we'll be back. All right, so that should be hot enough. So we're going to carefully grab here with our pliers, don't run away, and put on a handle. And I'm going to stand up to do this because I don't want it to, I don't want to screw it up. My hands are shaking. Looks like I'm going to have to trim that just a little. It was a good theory. Okay, it's not foolproof, but it's pretty good. Okay, so nothing is foolproof if you've got a big enough fool. So I ended up, I didn't quite get that completely burned around the entire circumference, so I did end up having to trim it with a razor knife and doing a little more burning with a cigarette lighter. So it's not optional, but I think it's going to work. So now for the assembly, we take our quick connect with the stop feature, and we put the O-ring on there. And how are we going to do this? There we go. And it is a snug fit. So we are kind of turning to get it threaded on. Okay, second O-ring, and the cap. Now I'm not quite sure how tight to thread this. If you put too much pressure on it, it's going to tend to deform the O-ring. So this is probably going to be a hit or miss thing. So, but there we go. Now we need to test it. We don't have a sink here in the shop, so I'll be back. Okay, here we are back from the kitchen. And we'll try to come up with some better way of connecting that. Someone's got an example of putting some cord through there that I'll try to steal. And the bag is not leaking where the hardware is attached. It is kind of sweating a little bit, which I'm not terribly concerned about. Maybe other people can chime in as to whether that's they find the same thing. So what we would do now, we'd have a hose probably connected. We'll need to redo this. Connect a female quick connect fitting to the inside of the filter, and go ahead and connect the quick connect and water flows, and disconnect and water stops. I wasn't sure whether the O-rings by themselves would keep that sealed, but they are. I've got some aquarium safe silicone that I had, in case it needed some additional sealant, but it doesn't seem to. So I'm not crazy about the kind of seepage that's going on there, and maybe I'll buy a new bag and redo this. But on the whole, I'm going to call it a success. All right. Hope this was useful to you, or at least interesting. And back to hiking. Bye.